All right. Good afternoon, everyone, on this snowy, icy, cloudy February 16th day. And welcome to our Finance Officer webcast on ESSER 2. And I know many of you are live with us today, and many of you will be joining us after the fact as we discuss some of the issues that have come to us on the new funding that has come available to us. So we have Robin Kenney, who's going to discuss some of the finer details to us, and we're going to also go into some of the personnel issues that many of you have had questions about, and as well as some of the other questions that have come through emails and phone calls as well. So I will pass it along to Robin, and we will get along to the question and answer session as well. So Robin.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you join us this afternoon. As Steve was saying, we're glad to have many of you with us today. We're also thinking about many of our colleagues that are having some problems and challenges with this severe weather we've had. I've learned from many districts today that some of them, some of their communities and some of their staff do not have power, do not have electricity. So we are thinking about all of you and hoping you get that restored very, very quickly. We're going to spend some time today talking about the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. That is a big mouthful, and now we have a new acronym because we love to deal in acronyms, but the acronym is CRISA. And some of the information today we shared with your superintendents last week. And so we want to be updating finance officers today, those of you that could not attend, and also to share just a little more detail surrounding some of the information we're providing today. If I can start and call your attention really to the guidance that has been posted on this topic. I don't have it posted. We'll post it in the chat for you. But it is the guidance that we've been adding to all of our coronavirus pandemic guidance documents. It is entitled COVID-19 Guidance for Schools. It is dated February 8th, 2021, and it is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. So it's ESSER. We will provide some information in this presentation about gear, some very high-level information. But the guidance document that is posted right now really focuses on ESSER, or what we're calling ESSER 2, as these funds really kind of are a continuation from the ESSER 1 appropriation. So if I could ask for the next slide, please. Just as a reminder, CRISA provides additional funds for our districts for ESSER 2 for public K-12 schools, and it also is comprised of GEAR 2, which includes funds for public schools, institutes of higher education, and educational partners as available or opportunities for those types of entities, and a set aside for services to non-public K-12 schools. And that non-public set aside is the emergency assistance for non-public schools, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later in the presentation as well. There is a 10% maximum state education agency reservation, and so we'll talk about that in this presentation, and some additional amounts for administrative cost included in that. Like ESSER 1, it is for permissible expenses back to March 13th of 2020. Although you may want to consider as a finance officer for audit purposes, you may not want to go back that far when you are looking at possible reimbursement of your expenses. You may just want to consider going back to July of 2020. And these funds are available for obligation through September 30th of 2023. If you'll remember, ESSER 1 was available through September 30th of 2022. So these funds have an additional year of longevity from the time that they are awarded. I also want to just, as we begin the presentation and have this discussion about these funds, I'd kind of like to set some overarching principles that you may want to be thinking of as finance officers. The overall purpose of ESSER and ESSER 2 is to prevent prepare for and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. And so I would encourage you to keep that kind of phrase in your mind as you are considering expenditures from ESSER 2. It shouldn't be for unrelated expenses. It really should have a tie every time you're thinking about your expenditures to that question. Your expenditures, of course, should always be reasonable and necessary as you deal with federal funds. That's something that finance officers are very familiar with. And I guess the other overarching principles that I would encourage you to think about, even though this is significant sums of money that are coming to our local school districts, it will go away. So recurring expenses are not encouraged, really. Think about your total cost of ownership. You might expend these dollars, and then if you expend them and you have continuing obligations or maintenance or other expenses as a result, then you have to figure out how you're going to continue to pay for those. And then finally, I would encourage you to be strategic and spend some time really planning for these expenditures. You do have through September of 2023. And even though there are discussions already at the federal level about the possibility of additional funds resulting from the coronavirus pandemic at this time, we really don't know if those are going to come or not. So I would encourage you, like the good finance officers always do, and I'm always encouraged to hear, I think most of our finance officers are conservative in nature and thoughtful, and so I would encourage you to continue to be that way with this pot of funds that are coming to you. The ESSER allocation for Kentucky is $928 million. And so when we talk about the permissible uses of ESSER 2, it is the same as ESSER 1 under the CARES Act. I would share with you briefly that those permissible uses are found on the funding matrix that are on the KDE website. And again, we'll provide that link to you so you can easily reference the funding matrix and what are permissible uses for ESSER 2, just like ESSER 1. There are no equitable services requirements for local education agencies, so you don't have to think about that when you're talking about ESSER 2. And again, we'll talk about the non-public schools requirements and some of the requirements that are at the state level just from an awareness perspective, but you don't have to worry about those equitable services requirements. We will ask that you do a new assurance document and a spending plan by May 15th of 2021, very similar to the process, trying to make it very easy for districts to provide those assurances and your spending plan. And our target date that we're looking to post that new assurance document is February 19th, so quickly approaching. We will have the same CARES Act reporting requirements and accounting within 6 months by the SEA, by the Commonwealth. And then we are asking, and the federal government asks us to track ESSER 2 funds separately. The other thing about ESSER 2 that I think you'll see, those broad permissible uses, again, that's under ESSA, IDEA, Perkins, McKinney-Vento, any of those permissible expenses are also permissible under ESSER 2. And then all those things that we've already been expending dollars for, either your PPE or your sanitation, cleanliness, training and PD for your staff, your meals for students, that just lots of really broad flexibility on the use of funds. Under ESSER 2, they've kind of highlighted a couple that were really permissible under ESSER 1, but they've really highlighted a couple of items that we didn't focus as much previously. And those are, number one, really addressing kind of the results more of the pandemic rather than being the preparedness step. So we're looking at learning loss of our students. How can we mitigate that? How do we assess where our students are in their learning journey, and so that we can provide the appropriate supports that they need moving forward? Parent engagement and attendance attendance and tracking, engagement tracking, all those things. You can see this shift from ESSER 1 to ESSER 2 in almost a different conversation around the use of funds. And then they've also highlighted facilities and mitigating the spread of the virus, HVAC, fans, ventilation in your building. So that is another thing that's kind of been highlighted under this one. The other thing that I usually point out, I don't have it on the slide, but ESSER 2 funds are not subject to supplement, not supplant provisions. However, whenever I talk about that and use that phrase, I'm always happy to have our colleagues from the Office of Special Education and Early Learning with us. I'm going to turn to the next slide and let Chris Thacker speak to things that you need to keep in mind when you're talking about ESSER 2 funds and the IDEA. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Robin. As school finance officers, you're all probably more familiar with the IDEA's maintenance of effort requirements than you really want to be, because it can be a pain and very difficult to document and keep up with. And as you know, there's two different MOE requirements, one that looks at how much you actually spent, and that's the compliance component of maintenance of effort. And then the other is the eligibility component, which looks at how much you budget. And when we're talking about your expenditures or budgets here, we're looking at your general fund, typically your state and local funds combined. I don't think our MUNIS system separates general from or state from local, but those are the two revenue sources that, as Robin mentioned, that you cannot supplant. You can supplement those costs, but you can't supplant them. So what does that mean? Under the IDEA, you have to maintain that effort to the extent that you have in the past. And those of you who have completed those LEA maintenance of effort spreadsheets that we distribute on an annual basis, you see where it looks at the highest level of state and local funds you spent in the previous year, either at the aggregate total or on a per pupil basis. So even though you're getting a lot of these ESSER funds to pay for some things that are allowable under the IDEA, you still have to maintain that state and local expenditure. In fact, just last week on Thursday, Jennifer Finch from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs was on a national webinar where there were people from states across the country, and she went through this very exact information and confirmed everything that we had previously provided guidance on about how you have to do this. So you can see the bullets that are here on this particular screen. They stay in place. Make sure that as you are spending your ESSER dollars, that you are also spending your state and local funds to provide special education and related services to children with disabilities, so that you don't get into a position of failing to meet those requirements, both in expenditures and in budgets. The very last line, I think, is the critical one that Robin had mentioned, is do not supplant general fund support for special education and related services, because it could result in that failure. And as long as you keep up with how much state and local funds you spent, you look at those past year spreadsheets that you submitted and see where you are, is if you meet one of the 4 tests that are included in that spreadsheet, then you should be good to go. But just be cognizant of it so that we don't get into a payback situation or into a circumstance where you haven't budgeted enough and you're not eligible to receive the IDEA funds. That is the thrust of everything we have to say right now from OSIL. The funds that you get from ESSER can be spent on special education. Just be cautious and continue to spend your state and local dollars. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next slide, please. So the other part that we'd like to share with you is about the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEAR 2 fund. As you're aware, we received GEAR 1 in the last round, and we worked with the governor's office and the cabinet on determining what allocations would look like for that. And if you'll remember, the 2 primary areas that school districts could actually use those funds were in technology and food service. So the governor's office has received another round of Gear 2 funding. Again, those funds are really divided into two pots this time. There's $19.5 million, which is appropriated and allocated for several purposes or several entities that could be chosen to receive these funds. Public schools is one of those entities. The others are institutes of higher education or educational partners. And that was the case with ESSER 1 funds as well. Higher ed received some funds from Gear 1 funds as well. So there's $19.5 million there. The other pot of money contained in Gear 2 is the emergency assistance to non-public schools. And, I don't know that we've come with a real shorthand, it is EANS, but it seems a little weird calling it EANS. But that's what it is. That's the shorthand version for it. And the allocation to Kentucky was $40.8 million. KDE is responsible for the administration and oversight of EANS. And so, as we had shared on the superintendent's webcast, we will be having separate webcasts and communications with the non-public schools on how that money, either money or services, will be distributed. So the important part for our finance officers on this call is a recognition that you don't have to deal with equitable services under the Gear 2 funding as well. Next slide, please. So let's get into some operational updates. These are updates from the initial conversation that we had with superintendents on ESSER 2 and some of the things that we have learned as we've continued to reach out to US Ed and learn from others about the use of funds. So in our initial webcast with our superintendents, we had shared that ESSER 1 funds needed to be used before ESSER 2 funds. And so we wanted to clarify today that while ESSER 1 funds are recommended to be used, and that's primarily due to that shortened timeline that ESSER 1 funds really have that life cycle through September of 2022, but it's not required. So districts could access ESSER 2 funds before they have completely expended all their ESSER 1 funds. If you think about it, that really just makes good sense. We know that many of you have budgeted your ESSER 1 funds to continue throughout the period of time that is allowed to be used. And so these funds, ESSER 2 funds, are going to become available for then, and we want you to be able to access those after you've put together a very thoughtful plan on the use of the ESSER 2 funds. We've had some questions also on payment of staff, and I'm going to hold that and let Steve Lyles join back in after this slide and talk about the payment of staff, because we've had a lot of questions and confusion around that. So we want to provide some clarification on that. We've also had some questions on facilities, and we are working toward an expedited process for facilities. We will actually, if you look at the guidance document, again, that I had referenced early on that has been posted on our KDE website, if you look at page 13, it provides a little more detail and explanation about the facilities process. We would like and encourage you to continue to reach out to the project managers here at KDE that assist your local school districts with facilities, because there are still some process requirements that need to be followed, even though it is expedited. So we would recommend that you reach out and have your facilities directors and those who usually work with the facilities areas to reach out on that. And then an FAQ will be coming soon. And we are adding to that. I had hoped that we would already have that posted for you, but we've still got a few that we're trying to work through answers on. I would encourage you, if you do have a question that you'd like to have included in the FAQ, if you can email it to the mailbox, covid19@education.ky.gov. We're trying to collect all these in one place and then be able to share out to all districts at the same time. Next slide, please. So before I go into this slide, I'm actually going to pause here for just a minute, and I hope I'm not creating a lot of problems for my people that are helping me on the technology side. But Steve, would you like to jump in for just a minute and talk about salaries at this point? Or if that is causing some technology problems, I'll be happy to keep going and we'll save it till the end.
No, that's fine. Elisa, do you want to bring up that slide for us?
Thank you so much. Look at these good tech support people.
All right. I need to get my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing here. Oh, they're on my head. Hang on a second here. All right. So one thing that we've discussed, and I have tagged several of our finance officers to assist in some of the recommendations that you see before you on the slides, and I also sent these out in the invite as well. So, like Robin mentioned, several finance officers have asked about using some of the ESSER 2 and also ESSER 1 funds to use in personnel costs. So one thing to keep in mind is, obviously, if you look at bullet number 1 or number 1 in the slide here, employees that are new or active staff that you want to use for the funds, that is a fairly simple process. And if you want to set them up in payroll with an ESSER project, and that is an process, and the federal benefits flow through, and that does not make a headache for you or us on the federal benefit side. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is that federal benefits do come out on those employees. So that is something to keep in mind. So it is an extra benefit or an extra cost that goes into those employees, whether they are new or existing employees going forward. That's an extra cost. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, so number 2 on the slide and also in the presentation. Historical salaries, if you want to go July 1 of 2020 going forward, and we do not, and listen to me, this is very something that you want to keep in mind. You do not want to go, I know that the CARES money and also the CARISA money goes back to March, but you do not want to go prior to July 1 for the fact of, for several reasons. For 941, for audit purposes, there are many factors that you do not want to go prior to July 1. So if you go to July 1 forward and want to reclassify folks for payroll purposes, okay, so number 2, if you want to go to July forward and reclassify folks utilizing federal funds, former federal funds, whether they be Title I or other things. But as Chris mentioned earlier, you do not want to mess with programs that deal with maintenance of effort. If you want to reclassify federal funds, folks that were classified in federal programs, you can do that. But if you do that, you want to utilize probably the payroll history transfer feature that is in Munis. And if you do that, there's a process there that are in bullets and how to do that. And it's a long drawn out process, and it's spelled out there. And the payroll history transfer does the payroll part of it, but then there's also some journal entries that are required as well in order for the federal transfer benefit piece to flow through as well. And that is drawn out for you there in the handout as well. And so that is there. That's not recommended because it's very complicated. So like I mentioned, if you want, the best way to do this, if you want to use payroll for utilizing these benefits, is going forward. And number 3, again, not recommended, but here's the steps to do it. Historical salaries, and what most folks are asking is if you can do it with general fund payrolls. And so historical salaries, July 1, 2020 going forward, usually utilizing general funds. You can do it with a general journal entry on the payroll side, but the Munis program does not do that, because you can only transfer, utilize the payroll history transfer program in munis, going general fund to general fund or federal to federal. And so it's a complicated process, but there's steps to how to do that, and the bullets below step number 3 there. So that's how you do that. It's not recommended, but there's steps there on how to do it. And like we mentioned, you do not want to go back prior to July 1. You only want to do it July 1 going forward. But our recommendation is only doing it today or going forward, because that's you've got, well, if you go backwards, you've got 8 or 9 months going backwards, but you've got almost 2.5 years going forward. So that's where your the bulk of your payroll is to utilize these funds. So that's where we would recommend you utilizing if you want to do payroll. So Robin, I'll kick it back to you, and we can answer more questions in the chat on the personnel side of things, but we recommend going forward on doing that.
Thank you, Steve. And look at that, just like magic, we're right back to where the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you to the staff for helping us with that. We've spent most of our time talking about ESSER 2 and the allocations that are coming to districts, permissible uses, and how you can use those funds that are coming to you. It's very important that you understand those funds can be used for any permissible purpose, any eligible purpose under ESSER 2. And so again, I encourage you to look at the guidance that is posted on our website. Those specific kind of enumerated purposes are on page 4 and 5 of that guidance. However, we had talked about earlier in the presentation the state set aside, and I want to come back to that for another opportunity that we want to make available to our local school districts. So the state set aside is $92.8 million, including $4.6 million for administrative expenses. And that state set aside allows the department to address needs at the Kentucky School for the Deaf, the Kentucky School for the Blind, our 51 area technology centers, and projects to support statewide efforts. Just like in ESSER 1, we initiated some statewide efforts to help local school districts, and we will likely do that again with ESSER 2. But as we've had discussions about the uses of those funds, and we are trying to refine exactly how much money that we think we really need for those efforts at KSB, KSD, and the ATCs, the commissioner really would like to allow districts an opportunity to access a significant portion of this state set aside. We haven't quite finished those discussions, but the reason we're reaching out and sharing this information at this time is we know that districts are beginning that planning process of how they're going to utilize their own funds. So this high-level discussion is really to get from an awareness standpoint to make districts aware of this opportunity, and then we will continue to refine it and provide additional details going forward. So next slide, please. So again, we are announcing this for district planning purposes. Our goal is to provide a minimum of $75 additional per pupil for all local school districts that meet certain criteria of eligibility to this state set-aside opportunity. And those access opportunities for districts are twofold. First, districts would spend 85% or more of the district's allocated ESSER 2 funds on direct services to support students. And by April 1st, 2021, and on an ongoing basis, offer 12 or more hours each week of in-person instruction to students who request it. So again, this is in order to access this additional pot of funds, these two requirements would be met. It does not impact any decisions that the district makes. You still have your local decision on how you want to expend your district allocated funds, but wanted to share this with you so that you can consider that if you desire to access the other pot of money that is part of the state set aside. Next slide, please. So when we first started talking about this, of course, the first question that always arises, as I'm trying to meet my 85% requirement of the district's allocated ESSER to funds on direct services, the question logically comes up, what are direct services? What does that mean? And we know very clearly that it's important to have very clear definitions to align with familiar things that finance officers are familiar with in order to appropriately advise their superintendents and your local school boards. So we are in the process of developing what that direct services means. I will share with you that in discussions at the Department of Education, it is looking toward those types of activities that directly impact students, whether it's instructional or supports for instructional needs of our students. To give you an idea of some things that probably would not be included, those are things more along the lines of facilities, so those improvements to your facilities, and technology, hardware type things, Chromebooks, mobile devices, those types of things. So I'm sharing that with you to give you a very high level definition. But the reason I asked for staff to include in the chat box sort of that link to the funding matrix, what we will do to provide that additional clarity to what would be included in direct services and what would not be included in direct services, we will actually add an additional column to the funding matrix. And I think what we're leaning to right now is sort of like a yes, no, so that you can clearly see what is included. If it's a yes in the column, it's included in direct services and can count toward that. If it's in a no, then it would not be included. Similar to ESSER and GEAR previously, opportunities to this state set aside will require a separate assurance and spending plan, and action by your local board to comply with the two big criteria that we talked about on the previous slide. I think it's also very important to note that once a district is eligible and can access this pot of money, then the pot of money under the state set aside would be eligible for permissible expenditures as if it was that original ESSER 2 allocation. So any of those types of activities that you are under the funding matrix under ESSER 2 would be permissible. And then we will have a reporting requirement as we have with other funds. Next slide, please. So that gets us through the presentation itself, and we'd like to allow an opportunity for some questions. I will share with you that I'd really hope that we would have nailed down kind of the direct services piece, because as I have talked with co-ops and superintendents and finance officers since we first introduced this topic at the superintendent's webcast last week, this is a very important information that you need to know in order to make decisions. But as we talked about it more, we thought it more important that we provide it with clarity and accuracy instead of just trying to share it generally. We knew that you would likely have lots of good questions about what is in and what is out. And so better for us to take a little extra time and to provide that clarity instead of trying to answer all those questions individually. So I do wish we had gotten that done a little quicker, but I think it will result in a better result in the long run, but by us taking a few more days to kind of nail this down. So let me pause here and we'll invite questions. Steve, I think I'll turn it back over to you as the moderator, and then we have the team here that will try to answer questions that are submitted from our participants.
All right. I have a couple that I received online, and I will pose those to our moderators first. And here is the first one. We are hiring staff and paying subs now so we can spread kids out for social distancing as we return to work. What documentation do we need to justify payroll as an expense? Is there an assurance statement they need to sign saying they work for COVID relief? And should we document with hire letters stating this is a purpose? So that's probably Karen or Thelma.
This is Karen. I don't see the need for any additional assurance as long as it's included in your spending plan that you're going to spend in that appropriate allowable category. Thelma, do you agree? Thelma, if you're talking, you're on mute. Can't see you. Okay.
She's on. Huh.
Yeah, she's lost sound. She just texted me. So
Okay.
let me double check with her, and
Okay.
if we want to move on to the next question, I'll get with her through text.
Okay.
Thank you.
Our first one is furniture an allowable expense, and some schools had to purchase desks for social distancing as they only had tables for students to work on previously.
I think that furniture could be a permissible expense provided you tie it back and keep tying it to that big question that you're using it to mitigate or respond, prevent the coronavirus from, and we all know that one of the very first things that we talk about always is that social distancing component. If we think about some of our classrooms, especially for our younger kids, I know a lot of the kindergarten or first grade classes have tables, and they haven't always had individual desks. So I think districts can easily substantiate that furniture from a social distancing component. Now, of course, once you do that, you really do need to practice the social distancing requirements. So, and we all have to be cognizant of that 6-foot social distancing that is in our Healthy at Schools document. But yes, I think that is a permissible expenditure.
Okay. Is rental or purchase of storage pods an allowable expense to store furniture that was moved out for social distancing?
That's a good question. I can see how if you're buying extra furniture and you have to have a place to store it, it is related. I guess my question would be for how long, and what are you going to do with that furniture just until you dispose of it? That would probably be permissible.
Can we use ESSER 2 funds for regular teacher salaries, not just teachers who are specifically responding to COVID needs?
I think that would be a yes. I mean, whether your teacher is teaching remotely or in a hybrid situation or in person, I would think that would be an allowable use.
Mm-hmm.
Could the ESSER funds be used for bus purchases?
We've debated that, and in fact, we still need to follow up on that and put it as an FAQ in our FAQ document once it is finalized. We're going to have to get some definitive direction from US Ed on that. So I guess the pros or the cons that would be debated. Pros, if you are buying that bus to enforce social distancing, so you're reducing the numbers on the bus, the numbers that you're transporting, and doing it in that context, then I see that you may have an argument. If you are not going to comply with that, and basically you're just going to fill up your bus as regular passengers to the full complement, then I think you've got a harder argument there. You're not really practicing the social distancing. So we'll get clarity on that one, because that is one that we've debated back and forth here at the department.
Okay. 0732 is an allowable expenditure on the CARES Act funding matrix. We have general fund encumbrance for our portion of the cost of 3 buses that are being purchased with the Volkswagen settlement. Would this general fund cost be an allowable ESSER 2 expenditure? So I think that goes along kind of the same lines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Our district planned to use Gear 1 to cover transportation costs, including our bus driver's portion of time and salaries associated with student meals during our in-person closures during March through May of 2020. Our journal entry was posted with no federal benefits match on KDE guidance at that time. With the new guidance regarding prior salaries for federal benefits, what are the next steps for March through May salaries of our district? And what are the next steps based on the new guidance from KDE regarding federal benefits match? Do we manually calculate the pro rata portion of federal benefits match for each bus driver? Let's see. And then the question just stops.
So I think we want to, Steve, it's Karen. I think we want to make, I'm wondering so they're talking about using their Gear 1 funds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe the guidance from KDE around the not having to pay the federal benefit portion was around the December funds, the coronavirus relief funds.
Yeah, and the Gear funds were state funds, I believe. I don't know. Well, let me read the question again. We'll have to get back with you on that question because that's a little detailed and kind of crosses the 2 different kinds of funds, Gear 1 versus ESSER 2. So we'll make note of that one. Okay. Can we use ESSER 2 funds for student incentives?
I don't know, what do you mean by incentive?
Karen, this is
Yes.
Selma. So
Yeah.
we had that question for ESSER 1 and we sought guidance from USDE and that was no.
Okay.
And well, incentives in the form of, the question was about if it was for like promotional items, and it was the question was around no. So if they have something specific, we can look at it again, but it was for promotional items. They wanted to buy t-shirts with the school logo, water bottles with the school logo, and that was a no. So, but they said if they wanted to purchase lanyards to promote social distancing, they could and we can look at it, and we may have to seek guidance again from USDE.
Okay, thank you, Thelma.
You're welcome.
Are these new salaries for staff added due to COVID-19? For example, technology and nurses only? And I think we already answered that. That would be no, it'd be for any salaries. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
For the state set aside, it says we have to offer 12 or more hours in-person instruction. Does the regular instructional day count, or are they only talking about summer programs, ESS and credit recovery, etc.?
So the regular instruction day does count. So when we're talking about meeting that minimum 12 hours of in-person instruction, it it is 12 hours of instruction per week. And if you are conducting in-person instruction, hybrid instruction, remote instruction, you might have that combination, but it is that in-person instruction that counts for all students or families that request it. So it's not just ESS or summer school. And then we've had some questions too surrounding that, because basically what we're going to do is we're going to ask your districts to sign an assurance, that your board supports that and you are moving in that direction. So we've had a few questions about, well, what if something happens which is really out of the district's control? Let's say the virus springs back up and, you have to quarantine people and stuff like that. Obviously, that would be an exception to that 12-hour instruction if it's something outside of the district's control. But your goal should be that 12-hour instruction in person each week, starting April 1st and continuing throughout the course of the longevity of the funds.
All right, the next question. Do we have guidance around the definition of direct services to students that Dr. Foster referenced last week? If not, when can we expect to receive this operational definition?
So that's what we had talked about a little bit earlier. I'd really hoped that we would have had that for you today. We're still working through those details. And when we talk about the definition, we thought the best way to share with finance officers would be through that yes, no type of definition tied to the funding matrix. So that way you could clearly see which things would categorize and count towards your 85% and which would count toward the 15%. So the commissioner actually was, I was talking with him by email right before we started this call. Our goal is to get that available on Friday, by Friday, close of business. So we will work very hard to get that done. We are working with all the program offices and with the commissioner to try to refine that so that we can add that clarity for you. We understand the urgency because you are trying to plan right now. So we're trying to do that as quickly as possible, but still be accurate and provide clarity to you.
And that link that we shared to the funding matrix will be where you will go to see that new addition to the funding matrix. It's called the CARES funding matrix, February 5th of 2021.
All right. Is technology DSS?
I think, again, in the presentation, I had mentioned that technology, the hardware components, at least specifically, are not going to be a direct service. But we will have more clarity around the rest of the technology components in the funding matrix. But at this time, Chromebooks, smart boards, projectors, those types of things are not going to be included as a direct service. Now, you still have the ability to use your funds for the remaining 15% toward that. And then also, as we talked earlier in the presentation, if you are eligible to receive the pot of money from the state set aside for additional funds for your district, you could then use that on technology or any other permissible purpose under ESSER 2. So I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that again.
Okay. What will happen if districts are unable to claim limitations on district support services, or unable to claim expenses that are that we are putting up for district support services?
So if a district chooses not to utilize their funds for 85% to be counted toward direct services, it really doesn't negatively impact the district. You can still spend your ESSER 2 dollars for whatever permissible purposes under ESSER 2. So that is a local district decision, and you can still choose to use that in whatever form or fashion. If you don't spend it 85% on those direct services, it just does not allow you to then access that additional pot of money. So it's not a penalty to the district if you choose not to expend it in that way.
Will the state set state set-aside funds that aren't claimed by districts be reallocated to districts?
We haven't gotten to that point yet because we really want to see how many districts will take advantage of this kind of unique opportunity. Those funds could be used back for statewide projects. I will share with you at the department, we had lots and lots of really good ideas from our leadership team here of projects that would benefit local school districts across the state. And as you're aware, we did that under ESSER 1 as well. And so we had lots of good ideas. In fact, we had more good ideas than really the pot of money that we had allotted. But the commissioner felt pretty strongly about trying to return some of these funds to our local school districts. So that's the path we've chosen. We'll have to see how many districts are really interested in this opportunity, and then we'll make decisions at a later date as to what will happen with the balance.
Does the 12 hours of instruction per week only apply to the board-approved calendar, or does it also apply throughout the summer?
I think the goal is to have 12 hours of instruction throughout the summer as well, but I'll try to get clarification from that question just to make absolutely sure.
Okay. If we use ESSER 1 or 2 to pay for employee COVID pay, sick pay, do federal benefits match still apply? Let's see. A JE is the most efficient way to record prior employee COVID sick pay against ESSER versus linking payroll intermittently for sick pay periods.
Steve, read that last part again.
Okay, if we use ESSER 1 to pay for sick pay, do federal, okay,
Yeah, I would say yes to the first part.
Yeah, journal entry is the most efficient way to record prior employee COVID sick pay against ESSER versus linking payroll intermittently for sick pay periods.
So I think that's
hey,
the
Steve,
question.
this is Kristen.
Mhm.
I'm not sure, but if TRS does apply to that, if it's a certified person and it's considered federal pay, I believe they want the federal match TRS deduction. So that's one reason it has to go through payroll. So it is collected and charged accordingly and reflected on the TRS report.
Okay.
So doing a JE doesn't capture that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If we show that we spent 85% of our ESSER 2 funds on direct support services to receive the set-aside funds, will those set-aside funds be available to each district at the end of the grant or whenever each district completely spends their ESSER 2 grant?
So access to the additional set-aside funds, the way we're going to distribute it is we will ask districts to sign an additional assurance document and a spending plan, just like we've done with the other federal funds that have come your way. So once that assurance has been signed, then you all have access to those funds. We don't have the date on which we're going to make that available yet because we're still working through the logistics of what the direct services will be. But we do envision that it will be very similar. You'll sign an assurance document. And so basically what you are assuring is that you will reach that 85% in the future. And you will take local board action to do that, and then the 12-hour of in-person instruction. So we'll be relying upon your assurance in order to disperse the funds to you. It won't be waiting until the end to see that you've expended the 85%. We don't see logistically and practically that that makes much sense. So we're going to rely upon your assurance to make that happen.
If furniture and other items mentioned are permissible, is it still necessary to justify tying them to COVID?
I'm not sure.
Sure.
Go ahead, Thelma.
No, yeah, I was going to repeat it again.
If furniture and other items mentioned are permissible under based on the object codes, do they still need to justify them tying them to COVID as far as allowability?
I don't know of an additional justification process that we've asked them to do. Thelma, I mean, as long as it's an allowable category and code.
Right, as long as it aligns with the allowable uses. And so I think that would probably fall under the one that talks about maintaining operation and continuity of services. So yes, as long as it aligns with the allowable use, I don't see any additional documentation that we haven't requested that.
Right.
For ESSER 1.
All right. Can the funds be used to purchase new curriculum following all the regulations for curriculum purchases?
Yes, because that would be allowed under some of the other federal programs, so it would fall under that allowable use.
Okay. What about roof repairs?
I don't know about the
So-
roof repairs in general. What do you think, Thelma? I mean, as far as the ventilation piece of it, but I'm not sure about. I think
Right.
we would have to look to see what the specific work was that needed to be done.
And then we may have to seek guidance from, USDE if we can't, come to an agreed mutual decision on that.
All right. All right. This question says, the matrix says yes for vehicles. What about the other pieces that go along with that, such as insurance?
I don't know about insurance cost.
Yeah.
I don't recall that us looking at that one.
I know. We have to make a note and take a look at that.
Okay. Okay. Is it allowable to reimburse the general fund from ESSER 2 for transfers to cover deficits in food service and childcare that were a result of a loss of revenue and continued services to students?
I would say yes.
Yes, food services, and you said childcare.
Mm-hmm.
We probably food services. Yes, I think we need follow up on the childcare.
Okay.
All right. When will KDE post the actual award notices for ESSER 2?
We were hoping to have them posted. Once we did make final decisions on the direct services piece, because there may be some changes. So hopefully by the end of or the beginning of next week.
All right. I think we're getting close to the end here. What is the Gear 2 funding distribution, and is it a percentage of ESSER 2 funding like it was in round 1?
So the Gear 2 funding is through the governor's office, and the original Gear 1 was I can't remember what the amount was, but the Gear 2 is about $19 million. But we have not heard what direction the governor's office is going to go with the Gear 2 funds. So we don't have any, we're waiting for guidance from the governor's office as to how those dollars for Gear 2 will be allocated, if they'll come to K-12 or higher ed, or what he'll do with those funds.
All right. Our district is requiring students that do not attend in-person school to attend the live session virtually every day for their classes to get credit. Is that what you were referring to 12 hours per week instruction?
No, I mean, I believe the in-person instruction is outside of the NTI process. So I think it's depending on guidance from CDC and the Department for Public Health. I believe the intention for the 12 hours is actually children in the school buildings, but I'll verify that.
Our school district's going to have the opportunity. Let's see. Can we use ESSER 2 to cover emergency COVID leave?
Yes, I believe that is allowable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If funds can be used to purchase curriculum, would this be considered a direct service to students?
I would
say so.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Can we use ESSER 2 for air purification filters for HVAC?
Yes.
All right, I'm looking at our last couple here. Let me see. If we don't have a deficit in Fund 51, is it still allowable to cover lost revenue or additional expenditures for the year with ESSER 2?
Read that one again, Steve. I'm sorry.
If you don't have a deficit.
If you don't have a deficit in Fund 51, is it still allowable to cover lost revenue or additional expenditures for the year with ESSER 2 funds?
I think it depends on the expenditure, right, Thelma?
Yes, as long as it meets that Fund 51, it's a food service is allowable under ESSER 1, 2, and Gear.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one I missed, I think. Why is milk not an allowable expense? We purchased milk that did not have to be kept cold for delivery during virtual classes.
I don't know.
That's
have to check with Lauren.
School service. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one I see is, how will 12 hours be done over the summer? Students are not usually in the classroom during the summer.
Yeah, I think Robin was going to get clarification on that.
Yeah, we're not sure on that one just yet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just the board approved calendar, or if it goes into the summer school piece of it as well. So we'll get clarification on that from Dr. Glass.
Yeah, and I think we've already answered this one too. If your district decides not to meet the 2 set-aside requirements, are you allowed to spend your ESSER 2 just as ESSER 1?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we will include all of these questions in the Q&A.
Mm-hmm. So if a regular instruction teacher is now considered a remote teacher paid normally out of general fund and not a new teacher or a new hire, can they be moved to the grant? Yes, but it's not recommended because it'll be a higher cost. So I think I mentioned that during my discussion on switching personnel from general to a grant. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right, that's wait for a couple more here. Let's see, I'll refresh my screen. Yeah, any that we somehow missed or skipped, yeah, we'll get to those. Let's see here. Yes, curriculum is direct service, but not Chromebooks. Yeah, I think that's, we did spell that out. Hardware is not a direct service.
Correct.
So yeah, if you have additional questions, yeah, we'll go on and just wrap up because we're down to our last one here. But if you have more questions, feel free to email them to me directly and we'll put them in our Q&A. And we appreciate everybody for sending questions today. We'll compile these and answer them and get them out as soon as we can, because some of these it looks like we will have to research and get out to you. And as Robin mentioned, some of them we hope to get out with some additional research by the end of the week anyway. So I know some folks weren't able to watch this live anyway. So we'll post this online as well, the webcast. So thanks everyone for joining us, and hope you have a good day, and we'll see you again soon. So
thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks a lot.